The moon hung low over the shattered spires of Eldridge Keep, its silver light bleeding into the fog that clung to the valley like a shroud. Rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the earth to mud that sucked at boots and bones alike. The air tasted of iron and salt, blood and tears, mingled with the damp rot of ancient oaks that twisted like forgotten prayers along the crumbling walls. In the heart of it all, where the great hall's roof had long since caved in, a figure knelt in the downpour, her chains glinting like venomous serpents coiled around her wrists and ankles. She was Elara, though names meant little in the underbelly of the Pax, an Omega, marked from birth by the faint scar of silver on her palm, a brand from the ritual that bound her kind to servitude. Her dark hair plastered to her face, hiding eyes the color of storm clouds, and her breath came in ragged gasps as she clawed at the links. The silver burned, always burning, a fire that seeped into her veins and whispered of submission. But tonight, under the eclipse's edge, that whisper cracked. Elara's fingers trembled as she pressed them to the ground, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath her, a wild, untamed rhythm that called to the beast she kept leashed inside. The Pax had cast her here, to the ruins, as punishment for a defiance she couldn't even name. Whispers of rebellion, they said. An Omega, dreaming of fangs instead of bows. But it was more than that. In the quiet hours, when the Alphas roared their dominance from the distant hills, she felt it. A fracture in her soul, a shadow stirring that no chain could hold. The rain intensified, drumming against the broken stone like the heartbeat of a dying god. She yanked at the manacles, the metal slicing into her skin. Blood welled up, hot and slick, mixing with the mud. "Break!" she hissed through gritted teeth, her voice a raw thread in the storm. "For once, just break." And the silver hummed in response, a mocking song that echoed the curses of her past. Memories flooded her. The Pax circle under full moon, the Alpha's claw raking her side for speaking out of turn, the endless nights of serving scraps while the strong feasted. She was the unseen, the broken tool, forged to mend what the wolves tore asunder. But pain had a way of sharpening edges. Elara's vision blurred as she twisted her wrist, the chain groaning under the strain. A drop of her blood hit the earth, and something shifted. The ground trembled faintly, roots stirring like veins awakening. She froze, heart pounding. Was it the curse? The old tales spoke of Omegas who bled enough to shatter bonds, to call forth the wild from the world's hidden places. Foolish dreams. The elders called them, yet here, in the ruins where kings had fallen and beasts had risen, it felt possible. A distant howl pierced the night, not the triumphant cry of her pack, but something deeper, more ancient. It slithered through the fog, wrapping around her like a lover's grasp, both promise and threat. Elara lifted her head, rain streaming down her cheeks like tears she refused to shed. The keep's shadows lengthened, and for a moment she swore she saw eyes gleaming from the tree line, golden, unyielding, watching. She didn't know then that those eyes belonged to him. Thorn, the Alpha King, exiled and reborn in fire, his rise foretold in the blood of the fallen. But the wild didn't care for titles, it hungered. With a final desperate surge, Elara slammed her chained hand into a jagged stone protruding from the wall. Flesh tore, bone protested, and the silver link snapped with a sound like thunder cracking bone. Agony bloomed through her arm, but freedom tasted sweeter than any wound. She tore at the rest, blood flowing freely now, painting the mud in crimson arcs. Each break sent a jolt through her, awakening the feral spark she'd buried deep. Her body convulsed, not in the full shift of the Alphas, but in a ripple of power, claws lengthening for a breath, senses sharpening to catch the metallic tang of approaching danger. The chains fell away, clattering into the puddle at her feet. Elara rose unsteady, her tattered shift clinging to her like a second skin. The storm seemed to pause, the rain lightening to a mist that veiled the world in secrets. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid thump beneath ribs that ached from years of bending. For the first time, she stood tall in the open, no bow in hand, no alpha's shadow looming. But freedom was a fragile thing. Footsteps squelched in the mud behind her, her pack's hunters, drawn by the scent of blood and rebellion. 3 of them emerged from the fog, their forms hulking under cloaks of wolf pelt, eyes glowing with the hunt's cold fire. The leader, Garrick, bared his teeth in a snarl that was half man, half beast. "Omega filth!" he growled, his voice gravel over steel. "You think a little blood buys your way out? The chains were mercy. Now we'll drag you back in pieces." Elara backed toward the keep's inner archway, her pulse roaring in her ears. The wild inside her clawed at its cage, urging her to run, to fight, to become the monster they feared. But she was no alpha. Her strength lay in shadows, in the quiet endurance that had kept her alive this long. "Mercy?" She spat, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her gut. "You've never known it. But I have. And I'm done giving it to you." Garrick lunged, claws extended, but the earth answered her first. Where her blood had spilled, vines erupted from the soil, twisted, thorned things that lashed out like whips. They snared his ankle, yanking him off balance into the mud. His companions hesitated, surprise flickering in their eyes. Elara didn't wait. She bolted into the ruins, the mist swallowing her form as she wove through fallen pillars and overgrown courtyards. The howls followed, a chorus of pursuit that shook the night. She ran until her lungs burned, the ancient forest closing in around her, trees like silent sentinels, their branches weaving a canopy that blocked the moon's judgmental gaze. Branches whipped her face, drawing fresh blood, but she pushed on, guided by an instinct she couldn't name. The shadow inside grew stronger, a warmth against the chill, whispering of allies in the dark. Deeper in the woods, where the air thickened with the scent of moss and forgotten magic, Elara stumbled into a clearing. A massive oak dominated it, its roots forming a throne of earth. She collapsed against it, gasping, her wounds throbbing in time with her heart. The hunter's cries faded, but she knew they wouldn't stop, not until she was chained again, or dead. As the eclipse deepened, casting the world in twilight's embrace, a figure stepped from the trees opposite her. Tall, cloaked in shadow, his presence hit her like a storm's first gust. Golden eyes locked onto hers, piercing through the veil of pain and fear. He was no mere wolf. Power radiated from him, ancient and unchained, the kind that bent the world to its will. "You bleed for freedom," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the ground. "And in doing so, you've called me." Elara's breath caught. The Alpha King, the one the legend said would rise from ashes to claim what was his. But in his gaze, she saw not conquest but recognition, a mirror to her own fractured soul. The chains were broken, but the true binding had only just begun. The mist curled around the ancient oak like fingers tracing forgotten runes, its bark rough and etched with scars deeper than any claw could carve. Elara's chest heaved, each breath a labored pull against the night's heavy veil, her bloodied hands gripping the roots as if they were the only anchor in a world unraveling. The figure before her, Thorn, though she didn't yet know his name, stood unmoving, his silhouette blending with the shadows of the towering pines that ringed the clearing. Those golden eyes held her not with the predatory gleam of her pursuers, but with a quiet intensity that stirred the wild pulse in her veins, making it echo like thunder in her bones. He stepped closer, the ground seeming to hush beneath his boots, leaves whispering secrets as they parted. Up close, he was a storm forged in flesh, broad shoulders cloaked in a tattered mantle of dark fur, his face half hidden by a hood. But the line of his jaw spoke of battles won and lost. Scars crisscrossed his exposed arms, silver-threaded like hers, but these were no chains. They were badges, woven from the very essence of the packs he had once ruled. The air around him hummed with power, a low vibration that tugged at the frayed edges of her soul, pulling her toward him even as fear coiled tight in her gut. "Who? What are you?" Elara's voice cracked, barely above the drip of rain from the canopy. She pushed herself up, back, pressing into the oak's unyielding embrace, her torn shift offering no shield against the chill that seeped deeper than skin. The silver scar on her palm throbbed, a reminder of the Omega bind that should have kept her meek, but now it burned with something new. Defiance, or perhaps recognition. Thorn tilted his head, rain tracing rivulets down his weathered face, catching the faint glow of his eyes. "The one your blood summoned," he murmured, his tone laced with the gravel of distant howls and ancient oaths. He extended a hand, not in threat but invitation, palm upturned to reveal his own mark, a faded brand, cracked like earth after drought. "I've walked these woods longer than the packs remember, exiled by those who feared what I could become. But your breaking called the rise. The eclipse stirs it all." She hesitated, the hunter's distant snarls filtering through the trees like venom seeping in. Garrick's voice boomed faintly, cursing her name, promising chains forged anew. Freedom had tasted like fire on her tongue moments ago, but now it felt like a fleeting dream, chased by the wolves at her heels. Yet this stranger's gaze pierced her solitude, offering a thread of connection in the endless night. Against every instinct screaming to flee, Elara reached out, her fingers brushing his. The contact sparked, a jolt that raced up her arm, igniting the shadow within her. For a heartbeat, her vision sharpened. She saw the forest's hidden veins, roots pulsing with old magic, the moon's silver light fracturing into shards of possibility. He pulled her gently to her feet, his touch firm yet tender, calluses rough against her wounds. "The packs hunt what they cannot control," he said, his breath warm against the cold mist. "You are no longer their shadow. But the wild claims its own, Elara, and it has chosen you as its voice." Her name on his lips sent a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something deeper, forbidden, an Omega drawn to the Alpha's flame. She yanked her hand back, the spark fading, leaving her colder than before. "You know nothing of me. I'm no voice, no chosen, just a fool who bled for scraps of nothing." But even as she spoke, the earth responded, a soft tremor rippling from her feet, vines stirring lazily at the clearing's edge as if listening. Thorn's lips curved in a shadow of a smile, melancholy etching lines around his eyes. "I know the weight of chains, little one. Mine were silver too, forged by the council that crowned me king only to cast me down when the curse took hold." He glanced at the tree line where shadows lengthened under the eclipse's deepening arc. The moon bled red now, painting the world in hues of warning. The Alpha's blood runs hot with destiny, but it demands sacrifice. I rose from ashes once, losing kin and throne. Your rise will cost more if you walk with me. Walk with him? The words hung between them, heavy as the rain that resumed its patter, drumming a rhythm of urgency. Elara's heart warred within her, the pack's echoes pulling her back to submission, while this stranger's presence awakened a hunger she'd long suppressed. Love, impossible and raw, flickered in that gaze, a promise of tenderness amid the violence she knew too well. But Omegas didn't claim. They were claimed. And yet, the wild inside her growled in defiance, claws itching beneath her skin. A branch snapped nearby, shattering the fragile moment. The hunters burst into the clearing, Garrick at the fore, his form half-shifted, fur rippling along his arms, fangs bared in a snarl that dripped with rage. "There you are, traitor bitch," he roared, eyes locking on Thorn with a flicker of recognition and fear. "And you found yourself a ghost from the old tales. The fallen king, skulking in the dirt, will take you both." The other two flanked him, circling like shadows given teeth, their growls harmonizing with the storm's fury. Elara's pulse thundered, the silver scar flaring hot, but Thorn stepped in front of her, his body a wall of unyielding strength. "You hunt what calls the storm," he warned, voice dropping to a rumble that shook the leaves. Power coiled around him visibly now, aura of gold and shadow, the air thickening with the scent of ozone and earth. Garrick lunged first, claws slashing through the mist. Thorn met him mid-air, a blur of motion that ended with a bone-crunching impact against the oak. The tree groaned, bark splintering, as Thorn pinned the hunter with one hand, his eyes blazing. "Your packs broke long ago," he growled, twisting Garrick's arm until a yelp escaped. Half man, half beast in agony. The others charged, but Elara felt it then, the fracture widening. Her blood, spilled earlier, answered the call. Thorns erupted from the ground, coiling around their legs like living chains, drawing cries of surprise and pain. In the chaos, Thorn turned to her, blood flecking his face, not his own. "Run with me, or they will bind you forever." His hand found hers again, pulling her into the forest's embrace as the vines held the hunters at bay. They plunged deeper, branches whipping like lashes, the path narrowing to a vein of ancient moss-covered stone that wound toward forgotten depths. Elara's legs burned, but the fear ebbed, replaced by a fierce clarity. The Alpha King's touch ignited her, not as a chain, but as a key, unlocking the beast she'd always been. Behind them howls twisted into screams, the eclipse swallowing the moon whole. But in that darkness, a spark of hope kindled. Destiny's cruel beauty, where pain birthed something unbreakable. As they emerged into a hidden glade, ringed by glowing fungi and the faint hum of buried magic, Thorn released her, his chest rising and falling. He faced her, golden eyes softening in the dim light. "The claiming begins now, Elara, not as servant but as equal in the wild's heart." She met his gaze, the weight of it settling like a vow unspoken, her soul fracturing toward rebirth amid the ruins of what she once was. The glade pulsed with an otherworldly hush, the glowing fungi casting ethereal blues and greens across the moss-draped stones. Like stars fallen into the earth's forgotten cradle, rain had softened to a whisper here, droplets clinging to fern fronds that bowed under their weight, releasing a scent of wet earth and wild herbs that soothed the raw edges of Elara's wounds. She stood apart from Thorn, her back against a smooth boulder veined with luminescent quartz, the cool stone grounding her as her body trembled from the flight. The air hummed faintly, a vibration that resonated in her chest, syncing with the erratic beat of her heart, like the glade itself breathed. Alive and watchful, Thorn knelt by a shallow pool at the glade's center, its surface rippling with reflections of the eclipsed moon, now a crimson wound in the sky. He dipped his hands into the water, washing away the blood of the skirmish, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. Rivulets traced the scars on his arms, silver threads that caught the fungi's light and shimmered like trapped lightning. Elara watched him, the distance between them a fragile barrier against the pull she felt, a magnetic draw that terrified her as much as it ignited. He was the Alpha King, risen from exile, and she an Omega who'd barely clawed her way from chains. Equals. The word tasted like ash on her tongue, laced with the bitterness of old wounds. "You speak of claiming as if it's a gift," she said finally, her voice threading through the quiet like a thorn snagging silk. She flexed her fingers, the silver scar on her palm still stinging, a ghost of the bonds she'd shattered. "But I've known only the kind that breaks you. What makes yours different?" The question hung heavy, born of the solitude that had been her constant companion, the endless nights mending pelts by firelight while alphas boasted of hunts, her dreams stifled under the weight of their expectations. Thorn rose slowly, water dripping from his hands like tears unshed, and turned to face her. His golden eyes held the depth of ancient forests, shadowed by memories that aged him beyond his years. He stepped closer, not crowding, but close enough that she caught the scent of him, smoke and pine mingled with the metallic tang of blood and power. "Because it's born of choice, not force," he replied, his tone low and resonant, carrying the rumble of thunder trapped in his chest. The packs twisted the old ways, forging silver to bind what the wild meant to free. I was crowned in blood, Elara, under a moon that demanded my kin's sacrifice. They called it destiny, but it was a curse, turning my heart to stone, my rise to ruin. I wandered these woods, a ghost haunting my own throne, until your blood cracked the veil. She searched his face, seeing the fracture he spoke of, lines etched by loss, a flicker of vulnerability in those unyielding eyes. It mirrored her own, the guilt of surviving when others bowed, the trauma of claws that had marked her not just in body, but in soul. An impossible tenderness stirred in her, a warmth against the chill of the glade, but she shoved it down. Love in the packs was a chain disguised as devotion, and she would not wear it lightly. "My blood? I spilled it in rage, not ritual." The earth answered because it pitied a fool, not because I wield some hidden power. Yet even as she denied it, the vines at the glade's edge stirred faintly, leaves rustling as if in agreement, their thorns glinting like watchful eyes. He reached out, hesitating before his fingers grazed her arm, tracing the fresh cuts from the branch's lash. The touch was feather-light, sending sparks through her skin, awakening the shadow beast within, a ripple that made her claws itch beneath her nails, her senses sharpening to the subtle shift of his breath. "Deny it if you must," he murmured, his voice weaving through her defenses like mist through trees. "But the eclipse doesn't lie. Omegas like you were the first guardians before the alphas claimed dominance. Your pain calls the wild's heart, mends what silver severs. I felt it when you broke free, the earth's roar echoing my own buried howl." Elara pulled away, but not before the contact lingered, a bridge between their fractured worlds. She paced the glade's edge, the moss soft under her bare feet, each step stirring faint glows from the fungi that followed her like loyal spirits. Memories clawed at her, the pack's ritual fires, where she'd been marked as child, the silver searing her palm while elders chanted of eternal service. "Guardians," she scoffed, though doubt crept in, softening the word's edges. "We serve scraps and secrets while you kings feast on glory. If this is truth, why hide in shadows? Why not storm the keeps and shatter every chain?" Thorn's expression darkened, melancholy settling over him like a shroud. He glanced skyward, where the eclipse deepened, the red moon pulsing like a wound that refused to heal. "Because true power demands sacrifice, not slaughter. I rose once, claiming the throne with fire and fang, but it cost me everything. My mate, torn by the curse's rage, my pack, scattered by betrayal. The silver in my veins twisted me into the monster they feared, forcing shifts that devoured my humanity. Exiled, I learned the wild's lesson. Strength blooms in restraint, in bonds forged from shared pain, not conquest." His eyes met hers again, raw with the weight of that loss, and in them she saw her own reflection, not the broken Omega, but a force awakening, tender yet fierce. The air thickened, the glade's hum rising to a low thrum that vibrated through the ground, syncing with their heartbeats. Elara felt it then, the lasso espiritual stirring, a thread of ancestral magic weaving between them, pulling her closer despite the fear. Her body warmed, the shadow inside uncoiling, not in rage but in harmony, as if Thorn's presence unlocked doors long sealed. She stepped toward him, compelled, her hand finding his chest, feeling the steady thunder beneath. "And if I walk this path with you, what sacrifice does the wild demand of me?" His hand covered hers, holding it there, the contact of vow in the dim light. Your solitude ends, but your heart opens. The packs will come, Elara, not just hunters, but the council itself, sensing the rise. They'll offer chains or death, but together we break the cycle. You, the voice that calls the earth. I, the king who listens. The words carried hope amid the melancholy, a promise of renascimento where pain found purpose, violence tempered by tenderness, death yielding to unbreakable bonds. But the moment shattered as a guttural roar echoed from the forest's depths, not the hunter's snarls, but something older, more primal, a creature stirred by the eclipse's blood moon, drawn to the glade's awakening magic. Shadows twisted at the tree line, eyes like embers piercing the gloom. Thorn tensed, pulling her behind him, his form rippling with the first hints of shift, fur prickling along his skin, claws extending. "The wild tests us now," he growled, golden eyes blazing. "Stand with me and claim your fangs." Elara's fear twisted into resolve, the earth responding with a tremor, roots rising like allies from the soil. The beast within roared to life, her vision sharpening, power surging through her veins like liquid fire. In that instant, amid the glade's glowing heart, she felt the transformation begin, not a full shift, but an awakening, her soul fracturing toward something whole. The creature lunged from the shadows, a twisted, dire wolf, cursed and malformed, its hide scarred by silver remnants, but they met it as one, Thorn's strength and her earth's fury entwining in a dance of destiny's cruel beauty. Pain would come, but so would the rise, binding them in the wild's unyielding embrace. The dire wolf's roar shattered the glade's fragile peace, a guttural thunder that shook the glowing fungi from their perches, scattering blue embers like dying stars across the moss. Its form was a nightmare woven from the eclipse's malice, massive, hunched with fur matted in thorny vines and eyes burning like forge coals, silver shards embedded in its hide pulsing with cursed light. It barreled forward, claws gouging the earth, uprooting ferns in sprays of soil and luminescent spores that hung in the air like spectral dust. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs, the wild inside her surging not in blind fear, but in a fierce, unbidden clarity. The beast's approach awakening the earth's ancient fury beneath her feet. Thorn moved like liquid shadow, his body half shifted in an instant, muscles rippling under skin that darkened with emerging fur, golden eyes narrowing to slits of primal focus. He intercepted the wolf mid-lunge, slamming into its flank with a force that echoed through the trees, bones crunching under the impact. They tumbled in a whirlwind of snarls and slashes, the creature's jaws snapping inches from his throat, hot breath reeking of rot and forgotten graves. "Stay back!" Thorn bellowed. His voice warped into a growl that vibrated the air, but Elara felt no urge to obey. The silver scar on her palm ignited, a burning map to the power coiling in her core, and she stepped forward, roots responding to her will like extensions of her own limbs. The ground buckled at her command, thick tendrils of vine erupting from the soil, twisted, barbed sentinels that lashed out to ensnare the wolf's hind legs. It thrashed, yowling in rage, silver fragments in its flesh flaring brighter, sending jolts of agony through the bindings that made Elara wince, the pain echoing in her veins like shared torment. She could feel the creature's curse, a mirror to her own. Twisted by the pack's silver rites, abandoned to the wilds where it festered into monstrosity. Pity flickered through her fury, mingling with the adrenaline that sharpened her senses. The metallic tang of blood, the wet slap of rain resuming on leaves, the raw scent of Thorn's exertion. He rolled free, claws raking deep gashes along the wolf's underbelly, a dark ichor spilling onto the moss where it sizzled like acid. The beast wheeled on Elara, breaking one vine with a savage bite, its eyes locking onto her with a hunger that pierced deeper than fangs. Recognition of the omega blood that had drawn it here, the fracture in the world's balance it sought to devour. It charged, faster now, jaws wide, but Thorn was there again, leaping onto its back, arms locking around its neck in a vice that strained every sinew. "Now," he roared, and Elara didn't hesitate. She thrust her hands into the earth, whispering a wordless plea born from the depths of her solitude, the plea of one who'd bled alone too long. The glade answered with violence and grace. Roots burst upward in a cage of living wood, coiling around the wolf's torso, thorns piercing its cursed hide. Silver shards shattered against the onslaught, releasing bursts of ethereal light that illuminated the scars on Thorn's face, highlighting the determination etched there. The creature bucked, nearly throwing him, but Elara poured her will into it, her body trembling as the power drained her, wounds reopening with fresh blood that seeped into the soil like an offering. Pain lanced through her, sharp as the chains she'd broken, but it carried purpose, a searing reminder that her strength wasn't in submission, but in this raw, untamed surge. With a final wrenching twist, Thorn drove his claws into the wolf's throat, silencing its roar in a gurgle of blood and shadow. The beast collapsed, vines tightening until its form stilled, the cursed light fading from its eyes. The glade fell quiet once more, save for the patter of rain and their ragged breaths, the air thick with the coppery reek of death and the faint floral undertone of magic spent. Thorn slid from the corpse, shifting back fully, his chest heaving as he wiped ichor from his hands. He turned to her, golden eyes searching, a mix of pride and concern softening the warrior's edge. "You called the wild as one of its own," he said, voice husky from the fight, stepping close enough that the heat of him cut through the chill. "Not a servant, a guardian." Elara sank to her knees, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave, but she met his gaze without flinching. The impossible pull between them intensified in the aftermath. The tenderness in his touch as he knelt beside her, fingers brushing a strand of damp hair from her face, stirring a warmth that battled the ache in her bones. "It nearly tore us apart," she whispered, her hand finding his, the contact grounding her amid the glade's watchful glow. "What if the next one does? The packs? They'll sense this. The eclipse ends soon, but the hunt won't." He nodded, melancholy shadowing his features, the weight of destinies intertwined pressing down. "They will come, drawn by the blood and the break. The council hoards the silver's secrets, twisting ancestors' gifts into weapons, but you've awakened what they fear most, the bond that shatters chains." His thumb traced her palm scar, gentle against the raw skin, igniting sparks that traveled up her arm, awakening not just power, but a deeper ache. Love, forbidden and fierce, blooming in the ruins of her guarded heart. She leaned into him, the contact a silent vow, their foreheads touching in the dim light, breaths mingling like shared secrets, yet solitude lingered at the edges, a reminder of sacrifices yet to come. Elara pulled back slightly, eyes tracing the scars on his arms, marks of a king who'd lost everything to rise. "Your mate, the one the curse took. Does this path lead to the same for us?" The question hung, raw with the fear of loss, the pain of loving what the wild might claim. Thorn's expression fractured, vulnerability raw in the fungi's glow. "It demands we face the fractures together. I won't let it devour you as it did her. But the claiming, it's a metamorphosis, Elara. Your shadow beast will rise fully and mine must yield to it. Pain with purpose, ours will forge something unbreakable." Hope threaded his words, a quiet light against the encroaching darkness as the eclipse began to wane, silver edges creeping back into the moon's crimson face. From the tree line, a new sound stirred, not a roar, but the distant bay of hounds, the packs closing in with relentless purpose. Thorn rose, pulling her with him, his hand firm in hers. We moved deeper, to the heart of the old temple ruins. There, the ancestors' magic will shield us and test us. They slipped into the shadows, the glade fading behind, vines reclaiming the wolf's corpse as if erasing the violence. Elara felt the transformation stir within, a rebirth amid the melancholy, her steps sinking with his in a rhythm of destiny's tender cruelty. The chains were gone, but the true binding wove tighter, promising strength born from shared scars, even as the storm of pursuit gathered on the horizon. The shadows of the ancient forest swallowed them whole, branches arching overhead like the ribs of some colossal beast long buried, their leaves dripping with the remnants of the storm's fury. Elara's hand remained clasped in thorns, a lifeline amid the encroaching gloom, each step sinking with the distant bay of the hounds, a relentless chorus that clawed at the edges of her resolve. The air grew thicker here, laced with the musty breath of decay and the faint metallic whisper of silver hidden in the undergrowth, remnants of old pack wards that hummed against her skin like vengeful ghosts. Her bare feet sank into the loamy earth, cool and yielding, but it offered no comfort. Every root snagged her like a reminder of the chains she'd only just escaped. Thorn moved with predatory grace, his golden eyes scanning the path ahead, the faint glow of the waning eclipse casting elongated shadows that danced like spectres at their heels. He hadn't released her hand, his grip a blend of protection and possession, warm against the chill that seeped into her bones from the night's unyielding damp. Yet in that warmth, doubt festered. Her Omega heart, scarred by years of bending to stronger wills, whispered that this bond was just another cage, gilded with the promise of power she couldn't trust. "The temple," he murmured, his voice a low anchor in the rustling dark. "It's buried deeper, where the ancestors wove their first oaths. The packs avoid it, fearing the wild's judgment, but it will call to you, Elara, to the guardian in your blood." She glanced back, the glade's ethereal light fading like a dying memory. The dire wolf's corpse, already claimed by the vines she'd summoned, twisted now into a natural shroud, thorns blooming with unnatural crimson flowers that wept dew like blood. The beauty of it twisted her gut, a stark reminder of the violence they'd wrought together, tender in its finality, yet laced with the melancholy of what the wild demanded. Her wounds throbbed in rhythm with her pulse, the silver scar on her palm pulsing faintly, as if protesting the freedom that came at such cost. "And if it judges me unworthy?" she asked, her tone edged with the solitude that had been her armor, the isolation of an Omega forever on the periphery. "I've served, not led. What if this power you see is just an illusion, born of desperation?" He slowed, turning to face her in a narrow cleft where moonlight pierced the canopy in silver shards, illuminating the faint furrow between his brows. Up close, in this stolen moment, she saw the fractures in the Alpha King, the weariness in his eyes, shadowed by the ghost of his lost mate, the sacrifice that had hollowed him. His free hand rose, hesitating before cupping her cheek, thumb brushing a streak of mud and blood, the touch igniting a spark that raced through her veins, stirring the shadow beast within. It wasn't dominance, but something rawer. Vulnerability shared, a bridge across the chasm of their pains. "Illusions shatter under the moon's truth," he said softly, his breath mingling with hers, carrying the scent of pine and ichor. "I rose from exile believing I was broken, cursed to wander alone. But your call, it mended the tear in my soul. The wild doesn't choose the strong, it chooses those who bleed with purpose. Yours will forge us both." The words wrapped around her like mist, stirring an impossible ache, a love that bloomed forbidden in the heart of an Omega. Tender yet fierce, promising tenderness amid the storm. She leaned into his palm, eyes closing against the pull, but the hound's bay grew nearer, shattering the intimacy. Thorn's jaw tightened, and he pulled her onward, deeper into the forest's throat, where the trees thickened into a labyrinth of gnarled trunks, etched with runes that glowed faintly under their passing. as if awakening to their presence. The path descended, the ground sloping into a ravine where fog pooled like spilled milk, veiling jagged rocks that jutted like broken teeth. Elara's senses sharpened, the earth's pulse thrumming through her soles, revealing hidden currents, veins of old magic that whispered of ancestors who'd bound wolf and wild in harmony before silver twisted it to chains. But the pursuit pressed close now. She caught glimpses through the haze, flashing eyes, the glint of claws on stone, Garrick's guttural commands slicing the air. They were closing, drawn by the scent of her blood and the echo of the dire wolf's death, the council's spies weaving through the pack to ensure no fracture went unpunished. A low growl rumbled from Thorn as they crested a ridge, the temple's silhouette emerging from the mist below. Crumbling spires, half swallowed by ivy, walls carved with snarling wolves and blooming thorns, a forgotten heart where moonlight pooled in cracked altars. But before they could descend, the ambush erupted, 5 hunters bursting from the underbrush, forms half-shifted, fur bristling under cloaks of shadow. Garrick led them, his face a mask of scarred fury, a silver-tipped blade in his grip that hummed with cursed energy. The fallen king and his pet Omega, he sneered, circling with his kin, their eyes alight with the hunt's cold fire. The council sends greetings. Your rise ends here, in the dirt you crawled from. Thorn shoved Elara behind a fallen pillar, his body rippling with shift, claws extending as he met the charge. The clash was brutal poetry, fangs tearing, blood spraying in arcs that caught the moon's glow, Thorn's roars blending with the crack of bone. He felled one with a savage twist, but the numbers pressed, silver blades nicking his side, drawing his blood that sizzled on the stone. Elara's heart seized, the sight igniting her own fury. She couldn't stand idle, not when this bond demanded more. The earth answered her cry, roots surging like serpents to trip a hunter, thorns raking another's leg in a spray of crimson. Yet Garrick broke through, lunging at her with blade raised, his snarl promising the chain's return. "Back to serving, whore!" he spat, but Elara met him not with claws but will, her hand slamming to the ground. The scar flaring as power erupted, vines exploded upward, coiling his arm, the silver in his weapon clashing against her earth's raw force in a burst of sparks. Pain lanced through her, the curse's echo burning her veins, but she held, twisting until he howled, dropping the blade. Thorn was there in an instant, finishing the blow with a claw to the throat, Garrick's body crumpling in a heap, eyes glazing in death's quiet mercy. The remaining hunters fled into the fog, their howls fracturing into retreat, but the victory tasted bittersweet. More blood on her hands, the melancholy of violence that bound them tighter. Thorn staggered to her, wounds weeping, pulling her into an embrace that was both shield and surrender. "You fought as my equal," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with unspoken loss, the tenderness cutting deeper than any fang. In his arms, amid the temple's looming shadows, Elara felt the transformation deepen. Her solitude cracking, destiny's weight shared, a love impossible yet inevitable rising from the pain. They descended into the ruins together, the altars humming with ancestral welcome, the moon's silver light bathing them in promise. But as the fog thickened, hiding deeper secrets, Elara sensed the true test approaching, a metamorphosis that would demand her greatest sacrifice, revealing the guardian she was born to be, even as the pack's storm gathered for the final claim. The temple's heart lay buried beneath layers of vine-choked stone, a cavernous chamber where the air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and faded incense, echoes of rituals long silenced by time's indifferent march. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the vaulted ceiling, silver beams slicing the gloom like blades, illuminating altars etched with snarling wolves entwined in thorned crowns, symbols of a harmony the packs had shattered centuries ago. Elara's footsteps echoed softly as she followed Thorn deeper, the hum of the ruins vibrating through her soles, syncing with the wild pulse in her chest. It felt like stepping into a living memory, the walls whispering fragments of oaths sworn under stars that no longer watched. Thorn paused at the chamber's center, where a cracked pedestal cradled a basin of obsidian, its surface rippling with captured moonlight that swirled like liquid silver. He released her hand, the absence of his warmth leaving her skin prickling, and knelt before it, his broad frame casting a long shadow that danced across the runes, glowing faintly at his touch. Blood from his wounds dripped into the basin, staining the light crimson, and the water responded with a low sigh, tendrils of mist rising to coil around him like spectral fingers. Elara watched, her breath shallow, the pull between them tightening like a noose woven from fate's cruel threads. This place stirred something primal in her, a lasso to ancestors she'd never known, their voices murmuring through the stone, urging her forward even as fear clawed at her throat. "Come," Thorn said, his voice a gravelly invitation, golden eyes lifting to meet hers. They held depths of shared fracture, his exile's isolation mirroring her servitude's quiet despair, a bond forged in the fire of impossible longing. She approached, the earth's subtle tremor following her, roots stirring faintly in the cracks like veins awakening. As her fingers brushed the basin's edge, the silver scar on her palm ignited, not with pain, but a searing clarity that flooded her mind with visions. Omegas of old, not bowed servants but fierce weavers of the wild's magic, binding alphas to the land's rhythm before silver twisted devotion into dominance. Her knees buckled, and Thorn caught her, his arms a steady cage around her waist, pulling her close until their hearts thrummed in unison. "The claiming ritual are," he murmured against her temple, his breath warm and ragged, carrying the faint salt of unshed tears. "It demands we face the curse together, the ancestors' gift, your blood calls it, but it will tear at us both." Tenderness laced his words, a fragile light in the chamber's shadows. But Elara felt the undercurrent of sacrifice, the melancholy weight of what this path would cost. Love had always been a distant howl for her, glimpsed in stolen glances during pack gatherings, crushed under the heel of hierarchy. Now, in his embrace, it bloomed raw and vulnerable, a flower pushing through cracked stone, beautiful yet doomed to bruise. She pulled back just enough to search his face, tracing the scar along his jaw, a mark from the night his mate fell, the curse's rage claiming her in a frenzy of fangs and regret. "What must we lose?" she whispered, her voice threading the air like a plea, the fog thickening around them, veiling the altars in veils of grey. The hound's distant bay filtered through the ruins, a reminder that the pack's storm inched closer, their silver-wrought fury hungry for the fracture they'd ignited. Thorn's hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her lip with a gentleness that belied the warrior's strength, igniting sparks that danced down her spine. "The chains within," he replied, eyes darkening with the memory's shadow. "Mine twisted me into isolation, a king without a pack. Yours bound your voice to silence. The ritual will shatter them, but it feeds on pain, the deepest kind, born of what we hold dearest." He guided her hand to the basin, their palms pressing together over the swirling light. The contact surged like lightning, her shadow beast uncoiling fully for the first time, rippling through her form in waves of heat and shadow. Claws pricked at her fingertips, fur ghosting along her arms, but it wasn't the violent shift of alphas. It was a metamorphosis, tender and tearing, weaving her essence with the earth's ancient heart. As they chanted the words instinctively, fragments of an old tongue rising unbidden, the basin ignited, silver light exploding into a vortex that enveloped them. Visions assaulted Elara, her childhood marking, the silver searing her palm amid the pack's jeers, Thorn's coronation, blood-soaked triumph curdling into betrayal as the curse devoured his mate before his eyes. Pain lanced through her, not physical but soul-deep, forcing her to confront the guilt she'd buried, the lives she'd mended in silence, while resenting the Alpha's glory, the love she'd denied herself to survive. She cried out, body arching against thorns, their forms blurring in the light's embrace, his own fractures surfacing in roars of anguish that echoed off the walls. The wild answered, roots bursting from the floor to cradle them, thorns drawing beads of blood that mingled in the basin, turning the silver to gold. Elara felt the transformation peak, a loss sharper than any blade. The solitude that had defined her, the walls around her heart crumbling as the bond sealed, exposing her fully to him. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with his, the intimacy of violence of its own, stripping them bare amid the ruins' watchful glow. Thorn's eyes locked on hers through the maelstrom, vulnerability raw, whispering, "We rise from this, together." His voice breaking on the promise, hope flickering like embers in the storm. The vortex faded, leaving them gasping on the stone, the basin still and dark. Elara's body hummed with newfound power, the shadow beast settled not as a cage, but an ally. Her senses alive to the temple's every breath, the earth's secrets unfolding like petals in her mind. But the sacrifice lingered. A hollow ache where her guarded isolation had been, replaced by the terrifying openness of their tie. Thorn pulled her close, forehead to forehead, their scars touching in silent communion, the tenderness a balm against the melancholy echo of loss. Yet the baying grew louder, crashing through the outer ruins like thunder, the council's elite, silver blades gleaming, drawn by the ritual's flare. Shadows twisted at the chamber's entrance, eyes burning with righteous fury. "The Guardian awakens," Thorn growled, rising with her, his form bolstered by their shared strength, golden aura flaring. Elara stood beside him, vines coiling at her feet like loyal hounds, the wild's heart beating in her veins. Pain had purpose now, birthing a force unbreakable, even as the pack's final assault loomed, promising violence that would test their bond to its frayed edges. In the moon's waning light, amid the temple's ancient embrace, she felt the rebirth stir, a queen in the making, claimed not by chains, but by destiny's fierce, loving grasp. The chamber trembled as the council's vanguard breached the outer ruins, their boots pounding stone like the heartbeat of an unrelenting storm. Silver blades caught the waning moonlight, flashing cold promises through the fog that seeped in like traitorous whispers. Elara rose beside Thorn, her body thrumming with the ritual's afterglow, a symphony of Earth's wild rhythm pulsing in her veins, no longer a shadow, but a roaring ally. The vines at her feet coiled tighter, thorns glinting like fangs ready to claim their due, while Thorn's golden eyes blazed with the fire of rebirth, his wounds knitting slowly under the ancestral magic that now bound them. 12 elite hunters poured into the chamber, led by the council's enforcer, a hulking beta named Varrock, his face a map of ritual scars and unyielding zeal. He carried a staff, topped with a silver wolf's head, its eyes glowing with cursed light that hummed against Elara's skin, stirring echoes of the chains she'd shattered. "The fallen king and his delusion," Varrock snarled, his voice echoing off the walls like cracking ice. "The eclipse wanes, and with it your heresy. The Omega's blood taints the wild. We'll purge it as the ancestors decreed." His hunters fanned out, forming a semicircle of bared teeth and drawn steel, their auras thick with the pack's twisted dominance, reeking of smoke and subjugation. Thorn stepped forward, his form rippling with restrained power, the air around him crackling like a gathering tempest. "The ancestors decreed harmony, not your silver cages," he growled, claws extending as fur ghosted along his arms. "You've hoarded their gifts, turning guardians into slaves, but she has awakened what you buried." His gaze flicked to Elara, a silent anchor in the chaos, a look heavy with the impossible love they'd forged, tender amid the brewing violence, promising that their shared fractures would not break them. Elara felt the pull, not as submission, but as strength woven from solitude's end. The ritual had stripped her bare, demanding the loss of her guarded heart. The walls she'd built against betrayal now crumbled to reveal a vulnerability that terrified and empowered her. Pain lingered there, a hollow echo of the Omega she'd been, but it birthed purpose. Her blood, once a tool for mending, now a force to shatter cycles. She raised her scarred palm. The silver mark faded to a faint line, and the chamber responded. Roots erupted from the cracks, weaving a barrier of thorns that lashed out, snaring the nearest hunter's leg and drawing a yelp of surprise. The assault erupted in a blur of fury and grace. Varrock swung his staff, shattering vines with bursts of silver light that seared the air, forcing Elara to dodge as embers singed her shift. Thorn charged, meeting two hunters in a whirlwind of claws and snarls, his roars blending with the stone's groans as he hurled one against an altar, bones splintering like dry wood. Blood sprayed, hot and coppery, painting the runes in crimson arcs that ignited them with golden fire. Ancestral magic flaring to life, bolstering their bond. But the numbers pressed. A blade grazed Thorn's shoulder, silver poison bubbling in the wound, slowing him as agony twisted his features. Elara's heart seized, the sight igniting her core. She couldn't lose him, not this king who'd seen her not as broken, but as whole. With a cry raw from the depths of her transformation, she thrust both hands to the ground, the earth's pulse surging through her like liquid fire. The floor buckled, massive roots bursting upward in a cage that ensnared three hunters, thorns piercing flesh and drawing screams that echoed her own buried pains. Varrock lunged at her, staff raised for a killing blow, his eyes wild with fanatic rage. "Filth! You'll bind no more!" But Thorn was there, intercepting with a savage tackle that sent them crashing into the basin. The obsidian shattered, silver water spilling like tears, mingling with their blood on the stone. Elara poured her will into the chaos, vines coiling around Varrock's staff, wrenching it free as thorns raked his arm. He howled, shifting fully into a hulking wolf form, jaws snapping, but the earth's fury held. Roots wrapping his maw, forcing him to the ground where silver met wild in a clash of light and shadow. Thorn drove his claws home, ending the enforcer with a mercy born of exhaustion, the body slumping amid the fading glow. The remaining hunters faltered, their auras fracturing under the chamber's awakening power, howls turning to whimpers as vines dragged them into the depths. Silence fell, broken only by the drip of rain through the ceiling and their labored breaths. Thorn staggered to Elara, collapsing beside her against the central altar, his hand finding hers in the dimming light. Blood slicked their skin, wounds throbbing in tandem, but the bond pulsed stronger. A lazo espiritual sealed in sacrifice, their souls entwined like roots beneath the earth. She traced the fresh gash on his chest, fingers trembling with the weight of what they'd lost, the illusion of safety. The solitude that had shielded them, now traded for this raw openness. Tears welled, not of defeat but release, the melancholy of violence yielding to hope's fragile dawn. "We broke them," she whispered, her voice a thread of wonder, leaning into him as the eclipse fully passed, moonlight pure and silver washing over the ruins like forgiveness. Thorn's golden eyes softened, vulnerability etching his face as he pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture final and intimate, sealing the claim. And in breaking, we rose. No more chains, Elara, only us, guardians of the wild's heart. His lips brushed hers, tender in the aftermath, a kiss born of destiny's pain, tasting of blood and rebirth, impossible love made real, fierce against the night's fading shadows. Outside, the storm cleared, a hesitant dawn creeping over the horizon, painting the temple's spires in hues of rose and gold. The pack's distant howls silenced, scattered by the fracture they'd unleashed. Elara stood with Thorn at the chamber's threshold, her hand in his, a faint scar blooming where silver once bound, a mark not of servitude, but alliance. In that first light, amid the ruins' quiet embrace, she felt the Renascimento stir. Strength from sacrifice, tenderness from turmoil, a queen claimed by choice, ready to weave the wild anew. The world awaited, not in conquest, but harmony's tender roar.